Right, welcome to the class today. So I think we were covering these topics. So we were on this day 13 configuration management phase, and we covered around 70% of it, but then we had short time in that day, so we could not complete the entire thing. We will just complete the other parts, remaining part, and then we'll move to platform scripting. Right now, initially, when you had configuration management database as the part of the certified system administrator course, then you did not have all these discovery service mapping stuff in there. Recently, they have started including that part also. So which means that they expect you to, otherwise it is a part of ITOM as a product overall, which you remember we talked about IT operations management. But still they just want to ensure that you have that understanding, high level understanding that what is discovery for, what is service mapping for, and how does it help us. Okay. Now, if you remember, we talked about configuration management database on that day. We'll talk about discovery. Before we talk about discovery, let me just show you a few things, just quick. So for example, if I just do a CI class manager, this is where I can see the hierarchy of CMDB, which means what is a parent table, what is a child table. So if you remember, we have seen that under tables menu as well, where we clicked on extend table and we selected that thing there. But this gives you very visual view in terms of which table is a parent of which table, or which table is a child of which table. Right? I'll be show you a quick example, and then we'll talk about discovery and service mapping after that. Again, CI class manager is not something they kind of cover that in basic CSA course, but I believe it is important to know about it. That is why I was talking about this one. If I say Windows Server is a class I'm interested in. So do you see this hierarchy? This is where it becomes most important. Now, which means that server is a child of Windows Server is a child of server class. Server is a child of computer class, and computer is a child of hardware class, and hardware is a child of configuration item class. So most of your server classes, network classes, all of those will be actually somewhere child of hardware. For example, if I just show you here IP router, right? And I do this. So can you see this, right? It eventually boils down to hardware. But then there is a parent class, which is network gear, which has a lot of other classes. You have switches, you have firewalls, everything under network gear. So this is where you can see the hierarchy of any class in CMDB. Now, for example, what else can you see from here quickly? For example, if I just click here, can you see this here? Basic information. So it talks about the basic information of this class. What is the display name? You can change it from here if you want to. What is the table name? This is a table name. So if you see the way table name is there for any class, it is always starting with CMDB_CI. So this is where, if you remember, we talked in the last class that most of your CMDB tables do emanate from CMDB_CI. That is why you will find this particular prefix in almost most of the tables. Right? So this is important to understand. This is where you have to put the icon. Now, if you want to kind of have a configuration system where you want to say that, okay, I want to, all my Windows Server should be managed by a particular group. This is also you can define here. Okay, so and you can see the hierarchy here also. Configuration item, hardware, computer, server, and then Windows Server. So you'll have Linux server, you have AIX, you'll have Solaris, all of that will come here after this. Now we are focusing on Windows Server. This is one thing you can see. Second thing you can see is attributes. Now, all of these attributes are the ones which are a part of this particular class, which means all those fields we talked about. So when you go to this form, right, this is where you can see all the fields in the form. We have seen those fields on the forms multiple times. Now here, how do you identify which one is the field only on Windows Server and which is the field which is derived from the parent class, which is server? This is where you can see. So for example, in this case, out of 114 over total fields on this particular form of server, all of these, which means there is nothing which is added specifically for Windows Server. Everything is derived from the server table. There are tables, there are fields. For example, let me just show you, for example, computer. Right now, if you see computer, now what you can see here is if I click on all, then the table number, then the column numbers are 107, right? So which means you have 107 fields on this particular form called computer, or on this particular table called computer. However, how many of them are derived from the parent class? You can see 86 of them are derived from hardware class, and 21 are the fields which are derived from, which are actually added only on this computer class. So you don't have these fields on hardware class, you have these fields only on computer class. This is where it becomes most important. This is where when you actually have to change a field, you should understand that should I be changing a field on a child class or should I be changing a field on the parent class? Generally, you change it at the parent class because if it is supposed to be reused across multiple child classes of that parent, we can use the same field across all the forms rather than changing it on individual forms. This is where the decision making comes in play. This is where you design the things properly, that you see that, okay, where should I change it? Should I change it at CI level? Should I change it at hardware level? Should I change it at computer level? Or should I change it at class level? Now, we will not talk about these things because these are especially ITOM stuff. But this is where, if you remember, we have already talked about suggested relationships, right? We have seen a table which this computer, for example, it is having a suggested relationship with multiple tables. Can you see this here? Computer virtualized by Hyper-V server. If I do this, computer depends on the server. So these are upstream and these are all downstream. This is where you can find out that what all suggested relationships we have for a computer class. We have seen a tabular view of that. This is just a graphical view, right? And then if you want to go to, I will not go to these parts because they are little extensive in nature. And this is where you can see the entire list. If I were to see, okay, show me all the computers, right? And all the records of computer, I can click on CI list, I can go to 10. This is where you can see the CI hierarchy. It will help you to identify which one is parent, which one is child, how many attributes have been taken from parent to child, what are the attributes which are only on child table, and then you can take a decision accordingly, right? Any questions on this part? One more thing, for example, if you remember, we had this thing on that cmdb.list is the parent class for everything, which is called as base configuration item, and after that cmdb CI extends this class and all other tables are extended from cmdb CI. But see this, if you were to create a new base configuration item from here, see the list of interceptor, because this talks about all those classes which are under this base configuration item. So it will not allow you to create a configuration item immediately. You'll have to select which one, what kind of device I want to select. For example, now if I want to select a Windows server, I'll click here and it will open that relevant form. So you don't want to open a generic form to add a CI. So always remember this, right? Whenever you are adding a configuration item in ServiceNow, you should always add it to its original class, which is the child class, not the parent class, because we have just seen that you have some attributes at child class level also, and you want to leverage those attributes while adding a configuration item. So you should be very clear in terms of in which class should I be adding this particular configuration item, and only on that class you should be adding it, because you have the right form, the right values there in the form, and you have a lot of other things, the related list, if you remember, we have seen, right? This is where it becomes all the more important to add any configuration item, any record in the right class rather than creating it generically, on a configuration item class. This is important to understand, right? If there are no questions, we can further go to discovery and service map. Now, we have talked about it on that day that based on this particular diagram we're talking about, right? We need to enter data for all of these kind of tables to ensure that we have the right mapping system and we are able to do the right impact analysis. Now, this is where I said that it is very important to keep the CMDB all the time accurate and updated, because if it is not accurate and updated, which is it is reflecting the current status of the real system of that particular item, then it does not solve the purpose, because it solves the purpose only when it is real time, it is updated consistently, and it is governed by a framework that somebody is managing CMDB. It is not that you have added record today, and after 3 months it goes stale, and now whatever approvals are triggering actually are not the right approvals. So to ensure that it happens, ServiceNow has launched a concept called ServiceNow Discovery. Now, when they say discovery, this is where they talk about that how do you automatically discover all of these layers of components from your infrastructure. So they have a product called ITOM. Under that ITOM, you have a product called Visibility Discovery, which enables you to auto discover all these things from the network. So you just need to do some configurations. You have to purchase a plugin, of course. You have to do the configurations. And once you do all of that, you are able to discover all of these things in ServiceNow, right? Which means that, and then you kind of create discovery schedules. And okay, I've discovered it now. Now I'm creating a schedule, which means every week or every alternate day at night, 12 a.m. or 1 a.m., it should run the discovery. It should bring the latest information from the devices, and it should auto update the CMD. This is how things work in reality. And everybody who is running discovery has to do this. If they are not having the proper schedules, then discovery will not fetch the results. So even if you have bought it, you have to kind of configure it accordingly so that you can have this information all the time updated. Now, for every kind of device here, you have a different logic of discovery. We will not go into that because that is covered under ITOM class. However, I can tell you quickly that how does it look like, right? So this is where you have this discovery thing. So this is your ServiceNow, which is on cloud. You have cloud data centers also. This is your internal network. Okay. And in this internal network of an organization, you have all these things. You have servers, you have printers, you have EPS, you have network gears, you have storages, you have databases, all those things which I was showing you in the previous slide. You have on-premise data centers. This is where you have cloud data centers. For example, any organization is using Azure cloud, they're using GCP, they're using AWS cloud. This is where they are fetching data from this one, right? So in this case, so this is where it talks about that you have concept of mid server. So this definition is important. What is a mid server? Because even for examination, this definition is important. First of all, the full form of mid server is management, instrumentation, and discovery. So the reason we have a mid server, because you need some kind of way to talk to the internal network, because your ServiceNow is actually hosted in the cloud, in their cloud. So there is no way it can talk to your devices internally hosted in your premises. So this is where you use something called mid servers to enable you to do that. And ServiceNow now talks to mid server, and this mid server in turn talks to all of these devices and get the information. And this is where it tells you, okay, what is optional? This is where you see optional. So if you do not have a mid server, for example, or you don't want to expose it to ServiceNow, you can use something called Proxy Server, which is using a network proxy. And then in that case, the URL changes. So generally people prefer this option, that they install a mid server in their premise and then they connect that mid server to ServiceNow. And then they open some kind of code. Sometimes you can see that it is working on REST APIs. For example, this one is coming by REST API. This area is coming by all of these storages, databases, printers, servers that are coming by SSH, HNMP, PowerShell. There are multiple protocols which it uses to fetch information, right? We will not go much into that. The overall idea you need to understand here is that you need something called mid server, which is a Java application which runs on a Windows service or a server, right? So you can install mid server on a Windows device, or you can install mid server on a Linux device also. And once you install it, you have to configure it in ServiceNow. Once it is configured, then it allows you to talk to your internal devices and fetch the information back to ServiceNow. That is why it is called as mid server, because it's actually the mid interface between ServiceNow and your internal network. Now, we don't want to go much into detail that, okay, how are these protocols being used? That will be a difficult, not difficult. It will be a different session altogether on ITOM discovery, which we will not go into. But the idea we have to capture from here is that there is a concept called discovery, which can discover your devices, which can discover attributes around those devices, which can discover relationships for those devices. If, for example, a Windows, an Oracle database is running on this Linux server, or your SQL database is running on this Windows server, all of that information, right? Your switch is connected to the server. Your VM is connected to this ESX. So all that layer, which we talked about in this particular diagram, which we had here, this is where it can bring the relationship between different components, that which component is running on what component, right? This is what, and it brings that attributes. So when I say attributes, I'm talking about all these fields which are here, right? So you just have to give them, for example, IP address, or you can put, okay, if the IP address and serial number is matching, then update the record, or else create a new record. So generally you give IP addresses to run discoveries, okay? When you actually run the discoveries. And based on that IP address, it brings out all the information, name, asset tag, OS service tag, whatever is here, and whatever is under related list we have seen on that day, it brings all that information for discovery. This is how discovery works. This is the purpose of discovery, is that it automatically updates CMDB based on a certain schedule for all those devices. which you want to discover, right? Any questions on that part? Okay, which I assume that it is all good. Now understand this concept of horizontal discovery versus top-down discovery. Now, if you remember, we talked about discovery just a while ago, and we said that it discovers attributes around a particular device. For example, this is a device. These are all Windows servers. So it is discovering attributes around Windows servers. And this is where you have the business services. For example, you have email service running here, or you have a SAP service running here. Now, the difference between horizontal discovery and top-down discovery is that in case of horizontal discovery, you do not get the relationship between a service, I mean, a business service and its resources. You can get relationships between database and server. You can get relationship between server and switch. You can get relationship between ESX and VM, but the service level mapping is not here in this case. I mean, nobody is telling you that this Windows server is related to the SAP application or this Linux server is related to this email application. This is where that you cannot find out that which services are getting impacted if you just run horizontal discovery. That is where they have come up with a concept called top-down discovery or top-down mapping, wherein they are also mapping applications, all those services which we have, and they are mapping them back to all this infrastructure, which means now your system is aware that if I change anything on this Windows server, it will impact this particular business application or this particular service. It was not happening as far as you had only discovery, which is horizontal. This is where the basic difference between discovery and service mapping is that service mapping brings the top-down mapping right from your application layer to a business service layer to your infrastructure layer, right? It connects everything from top to bottom. In this case, it is running only horizontal discovery, which means it is fetching attributes around it. It is fetching relationships between one or two layers, that server databases, but it does not give you anything related to application services, which is where it gives you that information. And that is why this concept is called as service mapping. So this is the difference between discovery and service mapping. The discovery is horizontal in nature. Service mapping is top-down in nature. It kind of relates all your components right from business services and applications to the entire infra layer. So now you will know that if I change this network switch, if I change this particular server, which all services will I have impact on? This is the whole concept of service mapping. And you will need mid servers in both the cases, because when you run service mapping, it first runs horizontal discovery also. Unless and until you've done horizontal discovery, you cannot do service mapping. So first of all, you need to discover these devices, you need to discover their attributes, and then only you run service mapping. So generally, when you run service mapping, automatically horizontal discovery runs in the background. But it is a prerequisite. Unless you have discovered things, you cannot actually do service mapping of that. So the difference is very clear now. The service mapping is used to make your CMDB service aware. It tells you that this infrastructure is belonging to this particular service, application service, technical service, or business service, whatever. But then the idea is that it takes you back to a service. You have multiple ways to do this. You have some kind of patterns and probes which runs in the background. We don't need to go into all of that detail. I'm just giving you a very high level understanding that you have something called tag-based service mapping, which means you're pulling some tags from somewhere, and based on that tag, you're creating a service mapping system, right? Similarly, you have patterns and probes. You write a custom pattern. Okay, if I find this particular pattern in any of these devices, which means this device belongs to this particular service. This is where you do patterns and probes. You can do traffic-based discovery, which is you are running an SMTP-based discovery from top to bottom, and wherever your communication goes on that network, it just connects to the next layer. It says, okay, for example, if I'm running SNMP discovery here, then it runs from here to here. It will go from here to here. It will go from here to here. It will tell you, okay, after this, it will communicate to this agent. After this, it will communicate to this middleware. After this middleware, it will communicate to Windows server. After the Windows server, it is communicating back to network device or storage or whatever, right? There are multiple ways to do service mapping. As I said, one is patterns and probes. Second is your traffic-based. Third is your tag-based, right? So this is how you have some other ways of service mapping. We will not go into much details around that part, but this is what you need to understand, that this is the concept which it uses to do service mapping, right? So we understood discovery, we understood service mapping. And there's one more thing I just want to tell you, that in the dependency view, which you should remember, you have seen. Okay, let me just see if I have something, any kind of service maps in my system. Give me a second. So I can show you something in the system directly, right? I don't have it enabled in my instance right now. So yeah, maybe once it is, I'll enable the plugin, and this once I enable the plugin, I'll show you the structure as well. But the idea is, I think this is how it is going to look like. This is why I put it in presentation also, that you're clear in terms of what is expected when you run discovery, what is expected when you run ServiceNow, right? Dependency views we have seen already on that day, that how can it show that this is this service related to a device, to a database, or it is related to an ESX. So that view is based on a technology called as D3 and Angular technology. D3 and Angular technology. This is used for creating dependencies. Even this is a real-time stuff, so nothing stale in the system. You can always see the runtime updated there, right? And so let me. I think we have seen that. I'm just trying to see one more case here. For example, if I were just to open this report. So this is where we have the dependency views, right? So see this, how many relationships this particular item has. See this relationship, right? This is where the power of the platform comes. They have run discovery on this device, and after that, it has brought so many relationships. And L1, L2, L3, we talked about L1, L2, L3 on that day already, so we will not go much into that. This is where you can see the entire thing. Right now, I've opened this particular thing. That is why it is focused on this, and it is showing you anything which is upstream, everything which is downstream. So this is where you can see the impact analysis. Okay, if I do something here, it will have an impact here. It will have an impact here. It will have an impact here. Then this is automatically done. You don't need to create these maps manually. Otherwise, nobody can do that, to be honest. So if you do not have any question on discovery service mapping, I'll prefer to go to the next. And one more, I think, yeah, we had one more thing here. We had this concept about where are you using CMDB actually in the real-time system. So you have the data of servers, network devices, hardware, everything in CMDB. Where do you use it? You use it in task table. Now, if you remember, we talked about it earlier, the task table extends your incident, problem, change, request, lot of those service management processes, they're all extended from task table, which means if I open incident form, I'll have something called configuration item to be selected. So let me just show you that quickly. So this is where you actually use things in the real life. So you have created a CMDB already. You have all the relationships. This is where you will select that CMDB configuration item. Okay, this is where you select it. Once you select it, then your system will automatically tell you, okay, if you want to do some kind of, selecting a device, for example, this one, or maybe anything, right? So I've selected this. Now, if I select this, I can see the information, which means what is this record all about, and those dependency views, which we've just seen that this is configuration item. Is it related to anything else? You can also auto-populate assigning to patient CI. So all your IT service management processes like incident problem, we'll talk about them in detail later on, if you know that it is a part of a course after we complete the fundamentals. So once you select this configuration item, this is where it is used across all the forms. So incident form, problem form, if I go. You'll have it here. Similarly, on change form, so multiple forms, you have this configuration item being selected. And this is where this slide I was talking about makes sense, that you first store everything in CMDB CI table. Now, this particular object is being referenced in any of these task tables, whether it is incident, problem, or change, or request, whatever. Right? This is how you use the ServiceNow database, configuration management database in your existing reports, and this is where you build the relationships. For example, tomorrow you want to find out on this particular server, how many incidents do I have? On this particular network device, how many problem records do I have? How many changes we had on this particular device in last 1 year? How many people have requested for this particular item in last 1 year, right? All of those kind of metrics, all of those kind of reports, all of those kind of analysis you can get only and only when you have an updated CMDB and you're using that CMDB in your incident problem change request records. That's the whole idea of it, right? Any questions on that part, that where do you use CMDB? I think we have talked about its benefits already, that you have cost optimization, relationships, impact analysis, all of that happens when you actually use CMDB, and that is why it is called as heart of ServiceNow. Now, if there are no questions, do you have any questions on CMDB or anything whatever we discussed? We have discussed discovery, we have discussed event management, oh sorry, service mapping also. Now, we'll discuss the last topic of the CMDB class, which is called as Csdm. Now, the Csdm is a latest thing in the market. I mean, it is not like very old, but what is Csdm? So Csdm, it is a common service data model, which means you can use this data model across multiple products in ServiceNow. You are using ITSM, you're using ITOM, you're using services, business services, whatever product or portfolio do you want to use in ServiceNow. This gives you a very guided framework in terms of where should you put your data, in which table should you put your data in, because what happens is in CMDB, there are so many tables that people generally who are implementing it, they get confused sometimes. Okay, why should I put this data into this particular table? Why should not I put this data into this table? Now this does not have a problem when you're creating data using discovery for infrastructure layer. For example, VMs will go in VMs, servers will go in servers, databases will go in databases. This is not a problem. On those cases, there is no problem. Everybody knows where the data will go. But when you build a logical layer, so that is where we have been talking about, that ServiceNow is eventually used to do service management, which means your ultimate objective is that you have to relate all your information, whether it is your incident problem change or your CMDB, ultimately to business services, to application services, to technical services, to those offerings which you are offering to your customers. So, and all of those layers are actually logical in nature. So what you see here is business capability, business application, business offering, service portfolio, application service. All of this is a logical layer in nature, which you have to build in ServiceNow. You have to configure it. You have to know that under what will come, right? We will not go much into detail because you are not supposed to know the entire CSDM, because it is a very complex topic. It requires its own 1 to 2 hours of classes. In fact, more than that, because the presentation which they have, the PDF which they have shared, it is like 40 to 50 pages, and it is quite huge in terms of understanding. But what I am trying to tell you, because they have this concept in your CSA course, they talk about why do we use CSDM. First of all, it is a common service data model. It is based on CMDB framework, which means all of these classes, whatever you are seeing here, they're actually under those tables of CMDB. However, the idea is that they have divided it into multiple sections. One is, design, that how do you design your services? How do you manage a portfolio? How do you sell and consume your services? Right? This is where you actually sell your service to a customer. For example, Amazon is selling its hosted services. This is where it will become business service. No, just understand the scenario a little bit more. Just a very high level understanding that. So for Amazon, their data centers or their hosted services, the cloud services, are actually the business services which they're selling to their customers, right? For Amazon, they are the business services. However, when that particular customer, hosts or deploys a SAP application on that cloud platform, then they are selling their SAP platform to their customers, right? So in that case, that SAP platform becomes business service for that customer. But SAP platform is not a business service for Amazon, because for Amazon, the business service, they are earning the revenues only on the cloud services, hosted services. Now, whatever you host it on that, it is not their business. Now, you have hosted it once, you have hosted it, then that customer who has bought that services from Amazon will sell it to their own customers. And they can sell those SAP services, those email services, whatever services they want to post on that, right? So this is where all of these terminologies around business services, technical services, application services, offerings, that becomes subjective to any organization, right? And you have something called design, you have something called found. So you have foundation data. I mean, your entire CMDB, whatever you have in system, your entire service portfolio is actually based on this foundation data. You have those business processes, you have this contracts, customers, locations, groups, users in system. That is an entire infrastructure. This is all here. Now all your CM. So the part which we just saw just now, some time back, that servers, databases, networks, all of this is just here. All of this is just here. Everything else is a logical layer. Whatever I'm building here is all logical. We will not go much into definition of each of these components. Right? If you want to just read out it separately, you can read it out. Maybe I can have a class later on after this course on CSDM exclusively. But right now we don't need to go into all of these things. We just need to understand that there is something called foundation, which is foundation for any framework in ServiceNow. Then you have design bit, where you are designing applications. Then you have build bit, where you are actually building this entire capability using SDLC lifecycle. This is where you are managing your technical services, your internal things, which is internal to your organization. It is not external to the world. This is where you have the external world view, which is where you either sell or you consume the business service offering. So here you'll always have application and technical services, which is internal. Here you will have business services, which is external service portfolio, which is visible to the external people. This is where you have catalogs, which they can request services from. And this is where you design it. So this is where, architects like enterprise architects, solution architects actually do the things. Now, what is important for you to understand from CSA perspective is what is CSDM, what is CSDM not? Because a lot of people are also confused about what they sometimes think that CSDM, is a product which I have to buy from ServiceNow. It is not a product to buy from ServiceNow. It is not a process or implementation guide for any product, to be honest. It is a framework. It is a general framework for doing your CMDB data modeling. You're using how to use CMDB tables, how do you use other tables also. How do you interrelate those things together to build an entire portfolio? That is why it is very important to understand what it is, as well as it is equally important to understand what it is not. So first of all, let us understand, it is not a process or implementation guide for ITSM or any product for that matter. It is not a set of reports. It is not a code which you can install, which means it is not a plugin which you can enable and start using it. It is there already in system. It is not a SKU or a product to buy, which you cannot buy the CSCM as such, because it is an inbuilt framework. It is not any automatic fix for any implementations, right? It does not fix anything which you've done already. What it is actually a standard terms and definition, set of standard definitions that, okay, what is an application service? What is a business service? What is a technical service? What is an offering? What is a catalog? What is a portfolio? It is the best practice for CMDB data modeling and data management. So how do you fit the data into multiple? Because I'll tell you, this is the biggest problem which people face when they build these things in ServiceNow. I mean, it will not come to your level when you're doing CSA. It is at the level of architects who design the entire thing. This is where they have a problem to understand, okay, should I create it as a technical service? Should I create it as a business service? Should I create it as an application service? People get confused. That is why it is a very prescriptive guidance, a set of framework which tells you that this is where you have to put it in. It is telling you how do you use out-of-the-box CMDB tables. We have seen there are 100+ tables in CMDB. You should know that how are those tables being used. Guidance for service modeling. And that's the same thing I just talked about. The business service, the technical service. And how do you map these things together? This is where we talk about CSDM. So CSDM is common services data model based on CMDB framework, telling you a prescriptive guidance. How do you use the entire structure around ServiceNow, the tables and fields and various CMDB structures, where services and all of those things, right? Any questions? Again, we are not going into detail of this, as I said, because detailed topic will be quite extensive in nature. We don't want to go into that. We just need to understand what CSDM is all about at a high level, and how does it help the organizations? How does it help the implementers? You just need to know that what are the different phases. We have design, build, manage technical services, sell and consume, and foundation data. These are different phases of CSDM. What it is not. Right? And what do you mean by foundation data? You can go to Google and download CSDM white paper. You'll find it. So CSDM 4.0 is quite new. I think it just came 2-3 months back. People are generally using CSDM 3.0, which was the old model. So they are kind of enhancing the model by every version. So they had version 1.0, 2.0, 3.0, 4.0. Now they're into 4.0. So they're slowly, gradually building on top of it. Okay, how do you code? So it is like agile way of working, that first you just do the basic stuff, then you do more advanced. For example, even this particular training, what we're doing is You're just learning fundamentals right now. You're just understanding at high level view of everything. Okay, what is service mapping? What is discovery? What is CMDB? What is the CI class? We're not going into detail. If I have to go into detail of each and everything, it is an epic in itself. You have to study a lot about every single thing in detail. For example, as I said, you might have even 5 to 6 classes to understand CSDM. You might have more than 10 classes to understand service mapping. You might have more than 5 classes to understand discovery itself, because it is a huge topic in itself. All of these topics are quite huge in themselves. It is just that we have to just understand a high level story right now for your fundamentals course, for your CSA course. Any question on CSDM? Okay, so I take it as no.
Hello.
Sorry, you had a question?
No, I'm fine.
Okay. Now, let's talk about the next topic for us. So I think we've covered this topic today. So it was a bigger topic. That is why I just wanted a complete hour to do this. But I think half of it, in fact, more than half of it, we completed on previous day, and now we're completing the rest half of it. Now we'll go to platform scripting. Now, what is platform scripting? Okay. Now, the reason we say that ServiceNow is quite scalable, flexible in nature, you can customize it, you can configure it, you can do multiple things, you can write workflows, you can trigger notifications, you can do a lot of conditional things. Okay, if this happens, do this, if this happens, do that. You can create an entire workflow. All of that is possible because of this concept of scripting. Generally, administrators are not supposed to do scripting because this is where developers come into play, but you should at least know that what are the various kinds of scripts in ServiceNow, where and when are they used, how are they used, what are the things you have to define for those scripting. That is the whole purpose of it, right? So we'll not go into code of that script, particularly in terms of how do we write JavaScript. So generally, ServiceNow backend scripting is Java scripting because it is quite intuitive, quite easy to use, easy to scale up. So that is why they have used Java scripting in their backend platform completely. And they have also done a lot of user-friendly things. For example, you can do a lot of things from the screen itself. You don't need to write a code. And that is where you as an administrator should know that these things I can do without even writing a code. This is where it is supposed to, you are supposed to know that part. And this is, you're also supposed to know the part that in these cases, I have to write a code. So maybe I'll use a developer. I mean, it is always good to learn scripting if you want to write, and you can grow as a ServiceNow developer. But again, it depends on individuals, so I'll not go much into that discussion of interest versus the requirement. But yeah, ServiceNow developers are quite in demand because of the scripting knowledge, of course. So let's understand there are various kinds of scripting ServiceNow. Let me go back to the screen. So on this CSDM front, I think if I type the CSDM here, I don't need to go to the system, to be honest. But then this is where you have the entire thing, design. You remember, right? Design we talked about all these business process capability, application object, manage technical services, application service, technical service offering, technical services, shell and consume. So all of that, what we have seen in this diagram just now, is actually there, right? Now let's go back to this, right? So scripting there are two kinds of scripting. One is your client-side script, second is your server-side script. When I say client-side, server-side, understand this concept, right? Now, when I am accessing ServiceNow, for example, I am using my browser right now to access ServiceNow. I am acting as a client to that particular interface. This whole ecosystem, I'm acting as a client because I'm accessing ServiceNow with my web browser. I'm requesting something, I'm getting response from internet going back end to the application. This is a very simple multi-tier architecture of any application you have. It is not only ServiceNow. This concept is like everywhere, right? Internet is going back to the internet is used here because we are using ServiceNow and cloud. If you're not using cloud-based ServiceNow, then you don't need internet. But then I think all the ServiceNow platform right now is hosted on the cloud itself. So you will have to use internet. And application servers is having the backend, and then you're having database in the backend, which is all those operations records, CMDB, and everything whatever you have in system is in the backend, inbuilt database. Now there are scripting which happens only at this level. I mean, I just want to tweak the behavior of a form, instance form, when it loads based on my roles, which I'm granted, based on the options I select on that form. I just want to do all those changes at the form level itself. I don't want to talk back to a database and do something around it. This is where you use client-based scripting, client scripting. And whenever you want to query something in the database, you want to insert something in the database, all those DML things, DDL things where you use database actually, the DQL, DML, DDL, all of those things, for those operations, when you want to do an insert, you update, any modify, delete, or even query something from database, this is where you write server-side script. So this has to be very clear. There is a concept of client-side scripting. There is a concept of server-side scripting. Okay. Now there are situations where you can call server-side scripting on the client, and we will go a little later into that. So see, where all do you use scripting? You use scripting in UI actions, UI policies, data policies, business. These are different areas where you have scripting. Business rules, client scripts, UI macros, UI scripts, UI properties, UI pages, script includes transform maps, source scripts, ACL scripts. Now, if I were to tell you one by one on these things, right? Then just understand this. Business rules are server-based, server-side scripting, which means it runs only when you want to query database, you want to insert something in database, you want to update something in database, you want to do something in the backend, not on the front side of your interface. Not this UI data policies, UI actions, and client scripts. They are done at the level of client scripting. Okay. Generally, for UI actions, UI policies, data policies, you don't need to write a script. You can, whether you don't need to write, but client scripts are generally you write client scripts for the cases where you have to actually do the scripting work. This is where, for example, I were to make a form field on a form mandatory, or maybe I want to do a read only or hide it. This is generally you can do with the help of UI policies. You don't need to actually do client script for that purpose. Client scripts are done for something which is more extensive, more complex in nature, where you need to script a scenario. Otherwise, the basic things you can do, the mandatory, the read only, the hide and show, you all can do with the help of UI policies. Now, there is a concept called data policies. Now, if you remember, when we were talking about, we were studying a topic earlier about data overview schema, right? We talked about it. The data policies are those policies which are enforced on the data. For example, there is a mandatory field. Now, I am entering that information from the form. For example, there is a field assigned to which is mandatory on instant form, and I am updating it from the form. When I am doing it from the form, then obviously it will be mandatory. But this is where UI, this is important to understand. Yeah, please take care of this part. The important difference between UI policy and a data policy is the same, that in case of UI policy, it only applies to user interfaces, which means when you're doing it from the front end, from the browser. When you have created a data policy with the same purpose, it means that whatever way you are inserting data, you are fetching it from API, you are exporting or importing an Excel, you are exporting, importing a JSON file, or you're doing it from any integration. If you have applied a data policy, then that policy will be restricting the data from all the sources. From wherever the data is coming in, it will restrict it. In case of UI policy, it is more for user interface where you are actually restricting that information. Okay. So far, so good. Any question on that part? Okay. Now, if I say our business rules, right? So this is where I said that, for example, I have a situation where I need to take an action when some record is inserted. For example, I have an integration with HR SAP, and I am fetching user information from that. Any new user in that particular system gets added to ServiceNow immediately next day as a part of the process. Now, once it is inserted in database, that is where I would trigger a business rule saying that after it happens, after a new record is created in system, please take this action. I mean, create a request, automated request, and do these 3 or 4 things there. This is where, these are the cases where you use business rules. Now, Acl scripts is something you already know. We have seen that Acl, there was a concept of conditional advance, and I could actually script those scenarios also, right? UI macros, UI scripts here. This is something we'll take a little later. No, it is not so important at this point of time. The script includes something which they have written in the script in the backend, which they can call in multiple of these areas. You can call it in business, you can call it in client scripts. Transform map, we have seen already when we talked about inputting data. How do you create a task map? There also you can script things. Right? This is interesting stuff. So the idea is that they give you both the options. They give you an option of a UI interactive thing which you can do. If you think you cannot, and this is highly recommended. You should be writing script only and only when you cannot do it using a normal user interface. Normal conditional things which are there, select this and do this, do this. This all can be done in ServiceNow using UI policies, data policies, or all those things. But you should be scripting only and only for complex scenarios, not everything by default, because scripting becomes heavy to maintain later on. When you do upgrades, you might have problems. You need somebody to ensure that you are keeping it up to date. That is why you should be avoiding it unless and until it is absolutely essential. Now, when I say about UI actions here, the UI actions are all those buttons which we see. Now, for example, if I go here, all of these buttons, I'm doing submit button right now. Maybe if I open a record, I'm opening this record, right? So if I go here, whatever actions I am seeing, follow, update, resolve, delete, even this context menu, all these buttons, all these clickable options, they are all UI actions. Even I can do it from here. I can do it from here. I can click on follow, update, resolve, delete. I can click on here from here as well. Now, if I go back to the list view, for example, if I were to, here, I am doing something here. This is also new action. I am doing anything which you are clicking and taking an action, right? I am selecting these two records and I am doing something like, take this action on this report. All of those things, all of these things I'm talking about, they're all UI actions. So just for basic understanding, whatever you are doing, click, wherever you're doing click and you're taking an action, that is your UI action, user interface action. This is what you do generally, and you can configure it using UI actions. Okay, when you say UI policies, right? So I'm here. I'm defining system UI policies. This is where you have your policies. Always hide read only related field list. For example, this is a policy. So there's a concept of related list in every form. They're just saying that if it is read only, just hide it. So I'm just showing you. Just taking some time to open it up. Okay. So now how do you define a UI policy? You define a UI policy on a table. You just describe it or what is required, for example. And you, first of all, you also define, is it globally applicable or is it applicable only for a particular application, right? So I think this is the one which is globally applicable. When to apply? This is the most important thing. So the trigger thing, if you remember, we had a trigger in flow. Similarly, all of these things, right? Whether it is client scripts or it is UI policy, or it is data policy, or it is business rule, or it is any of those scripts we talked about, all of them have this very important thing. When do you want to run this script? What is that use case on which you want to run this script? Only then you should do this. So they're saying that run this particular script, run this particular UI policy when you have sysID is not empty of any record, right? You want to run it on all the global forms. So otherwise it will tell you on which form it is specific. You on load, when the form is getting loaded, this is where you want to do it. Now you might have written a script. In this case, I have not written a script. So it is a very simple thing that, okay, I just do it. On this particular case, I'm just doing it, make it active, right? So, so the idea is that generally you don't do scripting for UI policies. Now, if I do this, system is really slow. Yeah. So the moment I click on this is where I have the scripting option is enabled. Otherwise, it is not enabled. Generally, we don't write scripting for UI policies. Right? We don't need to do that because scripting people write especially for client scripts and business rules. And most of the customization, so most of the intelligent logic in system, to be honest, is based out of business rules. So see the number of businesses you have. We will talk about them in detail later on. I mean, in tomorrow's class, not today, because it will take a lot of time. But then you have 6,421 business rules. This is where you can go to everything. You can go to client script. You can see how many client scripts are there. You have 2,660 client script, but then you had 6,400 business rules, right? So all of those things which I just talked about, UI policies, data policies, if I go to data policies, you can see. Now we will, in tomorrow's class, we will see that how do you write these policies, what all things you have to configure in the screens. We just talked about some time back around the UI policy, right? That is the only thing we have seen. In tomorrow's class, we will see everything. Data policy, we will see how to write a business rule, how do you write a client script, right? Not everything, I mean, not scripting code. These are not the ones which we generally have to do. This is the area of focus which we have to focus on: business rules, client scripts, UI policy, UI action, and data policies. This is what is important for a ServiceNow system administrator course and fundamentals. The concept remains same everywhere, right? So it is just an extension of a particular thing that it does something else in the background. This does something else in the background. Purpose of these things are different. Otherwise, the way you kind of configure them is more or less same. We'll talk about them tomorrow. I hope you had a clear understanding of CMDB. We talked about discovery, we talked about service mapping, we talked about Csdm, we talked about CI class manager also, which is very important, equally important. And we talked about the basic concept of platform scripting. Tomorrow, we will take each of these things in little more detail and we'll cover those things completely. Yeah. Any questions before we?
Okay, Alok.
All good? Okay.